All right. I think we are now broadcasting. Welcome everyone to today's session. My name is Eric Bond, and I'm one of the co-founders at Hustle Fund. And today's session is called Building a B2B Sales Monster from Scratch. I'm going to add a couple additional words there. So my colleague Kara, who's also on this call, she's our head of marketing, and I have wanted to do this session for quite some time. But the problem was that we couldn't find anyone good enough. So here's the reason why. A lot of people tend to, reach a certain point of maturity where their skills no longer are relevant. I'm going to try to use as many nice euphemisms about this. So example would be like maybe this person grew their sales from $0 to $1 million and then really couldn't quite cut it for the next phase. Or maybe another person joined from 10 million in revenue and made it to 100 million and then had to stop. But it's really rare to find someone who has been able to start with the company on day zero when revenue is also zero and stick with it, continue to level up his or her skills all the way through $1 billion of annual revenue. So our guest today, Mark Rosner, is one of those few people who actually has gone through this journey from nothing, scratch, to over $1 billion of annual revenue. And we'll have him introduce himself in a moment. I think we're going to learn a lot from his perspective on how you actually do this, like what kind of tactical things you actually think about from day one to prepare for $1 billion in annual revenue. I'm very excited. So before we get into the session though, oh, great. My worst nightmare has happened here. I can't control my slides. But before we get into the session, I just want to remind you that if you've been following on the Hustle Fund journey through these webinars, you'll know that we actually aren't doing this in isolation. The reason why we can put together these events is because of the great support of our partner, Oracle NetSuite. So got my slides up again. It's a little bit less present-y, but we'll stick to this. So I want to share a little bit of words about what Oracle NetSuite is all about. So building a robust sales engine takes more than just hiring the right sales personnel. It takes proper visibility and streamlined sales processes to reach the enterprise level. That's why early stage businesses trust NetSuite to deliver real-time financial visibility and key sales metrics to identify gaps and capitalize on opportunities. With built-in KPIs, dashboards, and reports, and all on a single cloud-based platform, NetSuite gives you the power to build a scalable sales engine from anywhere in the world. To learn more, visit netsuite.com. And I'm very happy to report that much of our portfolio are also very happy NetSuite customers. So we use them quite a bit within the Hustle Fund family. So what I want to do next is quickly cover our agenda. It's pretty light. We'll have Mark introduce himself. I'm not going to introduce myself. Mark's more interesting. We'll get right into the Q&A of how he built his incredible B2B sales journey. And then we'll reserve some time at the very end to answer some of your questions. And for that part of the session, I just want to remind you that this is a Zoom meeting. Probably at this point, you guys have used Zoom meeting, Zoom webinar before. We have a Q&A box at the bottom of the window, the modal window, where you can enter your questions at any time. Me and Kara will do our best to moderate. And then Kara, who is our head of marketing, may come back and help us with some of the questions that she's finding along the way. So with that, I am very excited to bring in Mark Rosner, who is the former Chief Revenue Officer at AppLovin. He's had a great career as a founder in the fintech space. Before that, he was in finance as well. And Mark, we'd love to hear a little bit more about you. And maybe I could start with this question, which is, who are you and why should we care?
Yeah, that's a really deep question, but I will give you give you some of my background and let everybody know a little bit more about me. So first of all, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it, Eric and Kara. I'm huge fans of what you guys are doing at Hustle Fund. You know, you are definitely moving the needle forward in terms of the early stage investment community, and much appreciated. And I do have, I guess Elizabeth and I go a ways back to the early years of last decade. We could say last decade now, I guess, 2010, 2011, when she was doing her
We're there
startup.
now, yeah.
Yeah, we're in the next one. And you know, it's just impressive to see how everything sort of comes full circle, and how, you know, a connection that you make maybe 10 years ago is still a relevant connection today, and I guess is relevant to sales and what we'll talk about now as well. So my background, like the slide said, former finance guy. Happily not a finance guy anymore. I was happy to get out of that. And then moved into the entrepreneurial world. So started at a company doing corp dev. We ended up investing into a company called Zedge. I ended up running that company, and that was a pretty successful one, mobile phone personalization. We grew that to 45, 50 million monthly unique visitors at the time, and left that in 2011 and joined AppLovin, like you said, in the founding team 2012. And that one was a really wild ride. We took that in 7 years from zero to north of $1 billion a year in revenue. And as you can imagine, you know, building a global business, driving those types of revenues in a span of 7 years is intense. And it takes, I think I would say it takes like strategic and tactical effort to do that right. And you know, luckily we did, and you know, I did that and moved on and started investing into early stage companies, doing what I love. So and here we are to talk about it.
That's amazing, Mark. And I do want to give a shout out to Mark. So he currently is a super angel, and I really want to emphasize super angel. We look at a lot of stuff together, and one of our favorite co-investors. So you can check him out at appliedrevenue.com. That's appliedrevenue.com. We'll flash up the URL at the very end of this session as well, so you know how to reach out to Mark. You know, when we are looking at your journey, and we're going to really focus today on the AppLovin journey, it's really interesting because like you joined at day zero, and then your initial role was as Chief Revenue Officer and Chief Product Officer. So kind of reminds me of my days, Mark, honestly, of college when I was getting grade inflation. And this felt like a bit of title inflation, but in this case, it actually was real. So, like, what was a CRO? Like, what do you do from day zero there?
Well, what I would say is like it's a little bit more messy than that, like anything in real life. So, started as CRO, moved to Chief Publishing Officer, and then back to CRO as well. But what I would say is like this. A CRO, when you're starting early, you're certainly on the ground, you know, on the ground, engaging with customers, bringing in customers. It wasn't so much a management role as it was, that was just where I was at my stage, coming from CEO, CRO of Zedge from the company before. And so started over here in I'd say like a senior role on the founding team of this company. And so, you know, started over there. But yeah, I mean, the early days is figuring out what actually works. And I think something that most probably is relevant to a lot of people that are listening over here. One of the things that you do want to do before you go out and you start, sort of before you go and you're pitching and you're selling and you're trying to you know, bring in customers for your product, is actually to make sure you understand your product well. So I remember the early days, you know, starting at the company, and I'd say it most probably took a good 2-3 weeks till I felt comfortable enough with the product to actually go out there and bring customers in for the product. And the reason for that was that when I was talking with somebody, I wanted to make sure I was the expert in the room, that I brought value to the conversation, and that they actually learned something from me versus it only being the other way around. Yeah. And you know, from my perspective, when you're out there selling a product, you'd much rather be the expert in that room so that you're able to give the advice. And the only way you can do that is if you bring in, you know, is if you take that time to really understand the product.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with the AppLovin product, Mark, can you describe ultimately what you were selling and some of the, I guess, like the subscription models that you're kind of selling? Were you pre-selling up front?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the AppLovin started as a mobile ad network. So very straightforward. We're putting together advertisers and publishers, advertisers and developers, app developers. In this case, stick our SDK into your app and show advertisement on an app. So or a game, either one. And so the sale over there was convincing a developer that it makes sense to implement AppLovin instead of implementing Google or implementing somebody else. So there were other products that we had at the time in the early days, it definitely was not only, I believe it was not only a mobile ad network. There were other tools that we had as well, and there was this process of understanding what is it that actually makes a difference for our customers, for our developers, and it took us time to get there, but that iterative process is super important for any early stage startup to really understand what that looks like, what your customers want, and to actually gravitate towards that, but in an efficient way. Meaning it's efficient and scalable from a sales perspective.
So you're serving developers, both large and small, and going back in time to those early days when you had basically no revenue, what were the first things that you were trying to prioritize, Mark?
That's a great question. So what I would say is we were prioritizing our how we gather intelligence and feedback from the market. And so this is another sort of like first principle that I look at in a salesperson and in any early organization, actually, because every organization in some, every early startup in some ways has got to be out there selling, is getting quick feedback, really quick feedback, which means talking with a lot of people. Having a lot
so this isn't actually converting the sale yet, but you're talking about like the customer feedback development. Yeah.
I'm talking about like talking with like multiple customers, getting the feedback, and basically every time you have another conversation, that conversation could be a phone conversation, it could be text, it could be Twitter, it could be email, it could be through your site, it could be anywhere. It's getting the feedback, the quick feedback, and improving that product quickly.
So how closely, I mean, I imagine very closely, were you working with like the product and engineering groups too? Because I imagine that customer development was highly relevant for them.
Yes, really closely with the product group. So I think this is something that people don't necessarily realize, and a great salesperson, a great sales team will actually be working really closely with the product team to work on that product. There is definitely a push and pull over there, and so I think one of the things to monitor for is the sales, who's pushing which way, but that process is super important. I don't think it's important that a sales team touches the engineering team at all, but certainly sales and product, and especially in the early days, needs to be really, really close.
Okay, so let's say that I am starting I'm a company that you've invested through Applied Revenue, right? And it's super early. And I think we've all been in this position where we are starting the customer development, we're getting ready to sell, but it's like staring into the abyss, right? It's like, jumping off a cliff where you don't know how deeply elevated, I guess you are. Can you tell us a little bit more about, as you're starting to transition and get some legs around the customer development on what you ultimately need to sell? Like, what were the next steps after that? Like, how are you doing outreach, doing your leads? Some of those tactics, I think people would be very deeply interested in hearing.
Yeah, definitely. So I think what you want to get through to your customer, to your potential lead, in the best way possible. So that may be a warm introduction. It may be sending multiple, sending a high volume of messaging in some way. So maybe you have 1,000 potential customers or 10,000 potential customers, and in some way you engage them. It may be becoming an expert. There are a lot of different ways to do it. But I'd say I'd say a lot of it will also depend on like what type of business you have. So it's like, is your sale a low low value sale, or low dollar value sale rather? Is it a high dollar value sale? What's the type of sale that you're making? And that actually will change the tactics that you take to start generating that revenue. And so what I mean by that is, if you've got like a low dollar value on the sale, your tactics most probably need to skew more towards marketing tactics, more towards brand, other things to reach real volume. If you've got like a high dollar value where, a single person can bring in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in revenue, that's where you get into very detailed and I'd say like, very specific ways to connect with the people that you want to connect with. And, in those cases, you're talking about, like I said, warm introductions from people that you know well and that know those other people well. And if you don't have those warm introductions, then also, but, very specific communication to these people, to your potential leads, to I'd say, explain to them why they should talk with you. Every person that you're reaching out to is most probably getting numerous reach outs from other people as well. Why should they talk with you versus talking with somebody else? And so the answer may be because you're an expert in the space, or the answer may be because you have something, the answer is going to be because you have something of value to give them. And it's not going to be because, you post a funny picture in an email or something, or a great, subject line that grabs their attention. A subject line may help. It certainly will help, a good subject line, but the email itself or the phone call or whatnot, you have to be offering something of real value to these people in order for them to actually engage with you.
Well, Mark, I want to test an idea with you, because this is something that I coach our founders, which is my philosophy towards sales, which is I really think that sales comes down to one of three first principles. It's, by Mark buying my software, I'm going to make more money, save more money, or make and save more money. And if you can figure out like which of those three principles you fit in, you just index really hard towards that, right? So it's like, dude, buy my software and you'll make like 20% more revenue this year. Did it feel like you came down to a first principle like that eventually as you guys are starting to hit your scale? Because you're talking about value, and in the case of AppLovin, I'd love to get very specific about like the like aha moment that people have whenever they engage with their brand.
Yeah, so I can't go into like specifically like, let's say what happened at AppLovin or like what that company does. But what I can tell you is that it's really important to both provide value and minimize risk. So when somebody's making a decision on the other side, they're saying, like you said, is this going to save me time? Is this going to save me money? Is this providing value to me? But also, what's my risk over here? What's my risk in engaging with the conversation? What's my risk in actually implementing the product? And that's a huge factor to getting your product implemented when there are competing priorities. Every company has competing priorities, and how do you make your solution or your service or solution a priority for the person who you're selling to? And so one of the ways is minimizing the risk in the test. And how do you do that? Maybe you start with a smaller product. Maybe you start with you started with like a small team in that company, or a single person, or maybe you guarantee the results. You guarantee the results for your customer. And
how do you do that?
Well, it depends what you're selling, right? So it's like it depends what you're selling. But if you're selling a service, I guess that would be an example. Like if you're selling a service that generates revenue for your customer, you can guarantee those results for a certain period of time and say, hey, listen, try this out. We'll guarantee you the results. It minimizes your risk. And if we can continue at that level, then great, we'll continue. And if not, not. And so like very often that will enable a potential customer to go ahead and try what you're doing. There are crazy things that you can do as well. If you're selling like an enterprise sales product, maybe you should consider paying your customer to try it out versus them paying you. It's
Oh, crazy.
It's crazy, but is it really that crazy?
I suppose not. I mean, actually, as I was sort of hearing your response, at first I was like, this is ridiculous to guarantee a result. But then I realized I actually did the exact same thing. In my first company, I said, if I don't give you $10,000 in incremental revenue off my product in the first month, then there's no reason to renew. So I wasn't saying like I'm going to guarantee it, but it was just like I was sort of laying out a bet out there, a gambit of just like I feel very confident.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways to do it without laying out money as well, like that, right? So like there are ways to do it. So you want to minimize your risk when you're selling as well. So if you're making a guarantee, you certainly want to minimize what the downside impact of that can be. But there are a lot of ways to do it. I mean, like there are crazy ways to do it, and there are not obvious ways to do it as well. And I think you just need to think through like what the variations of those are. And the other thing as well is like this is very dependent on the product that you're out there selling. So depending on what that is, you'll also get that feedback from the market as you're having these conversations, as your sales team is having these conversations. You'll know what ends up actually being valuable for your customers and what doesn't.
One of the questions I was really excited to ask you is something that's probably quite relevant to many of the early founding teams that are likely listening to today's session, which is who should be selling? Or is it whom? I can't remember. I'm very bad at English. Yeah. So, in the early days, I usually believe that it's the CEO, that should be doing most of the selling here. In AppLovin's case, you guys had a different arrangement where they hired essentially a head of revenue and sales, Mark, from day one, and that clearly worked. Do you have any strong opinions on like whether the founder is necessary for selling, and what do you advocate to your teams that you coach?
Yeah, I think the founder is necessary for selling as well. So we definitely sold together. I did not sell in a silo. I think it's important that a founder does go out there and sell as well. And I think the question really of whether you hire somebody, you bring somebody in, you bring in a co-founder or not, in terms of that, is really just a question of acceleration. It's often a question of acceleration and how quickly you want to move in the market that you're in. And so if you have the resources and the ability to accelerate really quickly, then I'd say go for it and bring it in. And if not, then you as a founder, as a CEO is going to be out there selling. But even if you bring somebody in, you still have to be out there selling together with that person. There's no such thing in an early stage startup as selling in a silo. Like I said, I mean, you're incorporating product, you're incorporating, strategy. It's everything you do, especially early stage, is super strategic. You want to be selling a product that's profitable. You want to be selling a product that you could figure out how to increase your pricing, not decrease your pricing. And in order to do that, you need to know what actually sells and like what and how to improve the product through that process.
Going back into like some of the tactics of the early days too, can you describe some of the assets that you guys had to create to start to do some early scaled selling? Like were there white papers or webinars or pitch deck? What kinds of assets were most helpful for you?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And we try to stay away from pitch decks. We try to, if we had to share material, which we did have to do, we tried to keep it as a one pager.
I see.
To make it really simple and straightforward. Meaning if we couldn't communicate this in one page, then like it just wasn't worth communicating. It's, trying to capture the attention of someone is just incredibly difficult, and putting a deck in front of them is even more challenging. And it does depend on the type of company that you're selling to. So if you're selling to a startup, you'll get away with nothing. Or a website or a one pager. If you're selling to a larger company, you might need something a little more compelling. A sales cycle is maybe a little bit longer. But yeah, I think it very much depends on who you're selling to, and that type of customer. You might need more material for the larger customers. But I would also then caution when you're an early stage startup, same thing. It's all about frequency, and it's all about high velocity in terms of feedback and the feedback loop on the sales cycle. really, really important not to get bogged down with customers that, maybe like 6 to 12 month sales cycles, and figure out how to make your sales cycle as short as possible. And if that means that in the beginning you're talking with smaller customers, talk with smaller customers.
So I kind of want to take a slightly different turn in this conversation, because when we were preparing for this session last week, Mark, you threw in something that was kind of interesting, which is around introverted salespeople. Do you consider yourself to be introverted?
Yeah, totally. I'm a total introvert.
Let's explore this a little bit. I mean, this is counter, I guess. It's a little bit lazy. I think I sort of came to the conclusion that like all different personality types a long time ago can be really effective here. But, what kind of advantages I think did you have in your personality type that allowed you to get to $1 billion in sales? Because I think everyone thinks that you have some sort of you should be like a Mark Benioff kind of like personality, really huge and like fill the stage for this kind of level of scale that you've been able to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I think both personality types could be successful. I think that what we found, at least, or what I found at least with my style, is that introverted sales types tended to be better in terms of communication, one-on-one communication, analytical skills, ability to understand the product, which is super important for us. I'd say like that is sort of like the underlying, I'd say of all salespeople we had, that I'd say ability to understand the product was maybe the most important thing. Because without that, it was people going out there selling something that we didn't have, which that's not great. You don't want to do that. You want to sell what you actually have and what you can actually deliver on. So understanding that product, just being analytical, being able to take the time to spend. And so like there are extroverted salespeople that can do this too. And this is not like a clear and sort of defining line. But I just, in my experience at least, tend to see that there's been a lot of benefits for us on that side of the scale. But it does go both ways for sure. There's no hard and fast rule on this.
I want to ask one more sort of question about you specifically before we get back to a bunch of like tactical things that we had around sales funnels and so forth, which is,
Sure.
The thing that I really admire about you, Mark, as we become buds over the last few years is I can't do what you did. So I know that around 50 people, the companies that I've ran in the past, like I start to suck. Just like, like I'm a really small business guy at the end of the day when it comes to being an operator, and I could never really find ways of leveling up. And this is something that I also coach our teams too, which is like, as you think about your organizational scale, working yourself out of a job is sensible too. As a strategy, because like, we each have like, I think an area where we really shine. And then, there are others who can do it better sometimes, but you grew with the organization all the way.
Yeah.
How?
So I don't think we're all that different in this. And so what I mean by that is, we grew most probably to 200, 250 people, maybe a little bit more by the time I left. And so I am also an early stage, type of company. But what we did is that whenever we had a problem, we figured out how to, there are two things. One is we tried to figure out how to solve it with technology versus people. Try to minimize hiring as much as possible. When people tell me that like, oh yeah, we've got like, we're a 30-person startup, we're a 500-person startup, we're a 1,000-person startup, that doesn't impress me. It actually scares me. The more people you tell me you have, the scarier it becomes. And the reason is because you're solving problems with people and not with technology. And like when you solve problems with people, that's not a scalable way to solve problems. The only scalable way to do it is with technology. That's what we're all about over here in terms of, trying to maximize output, trying to be efficient, right? Trying to be efficient with our time, with our money, and trying to maximize value. And you do that by heavily relying on technology. So that's one. And then that's on I'd say the cost side of things. on the revenue side of things, it's figuring out how do you maximize scale in the product, you know, from a, how do you maximize revenue per employee, essentially, right? Revenue per, you know, people that you have in the company. And so if you focus on those two things, you suddenly get this wide gap where, you know, your revenue per person is like, is crazy, is growing like crazy, and like, you know, you're keeping your cost structure down, which is really important in a startup. Otherwise, you know, you end up in a bad place from a funding perspective, and from a management perspective. So for us, it was all about focusing on those two things and how do we maximize that skill, but obviously still have a distributed customer base and a diversified customer base, and make sure that we have, you know, a business that we can, you know, that we can feel safe and feel like it's growing in a safe and structured and diversified way. And so I think that's what any company needs to do. They need to focus on how to minimize the number of people that they have, and maximize the amount of revenue. And it doesn't mean don't hire people. Hiring people is great. It just means hire people only when you don't have another way to deal with the problem. And I think the best companies are able to do this properly.
I want to talk about hiring, but I really like this response, and it's making me think a lot, actually, in terms of my view on people count too. And the confession that I have to make, and this may be even an apology to anyone who's had to work with me and saw that I became like a terrible manager at one point, is actually the people were always a problem for me. Right. It was just like I couldn't find ways of putting enough time into developing the careers of the folks that I really loved. But, you know, it just like started to take too much away from me focusing on the business. And that's the balancing act that got too difficult for me. Right. Like I just don't know how to manage a 250 person organization. So I think the default of like solving it with technology is an interesting way of, I guess, like deferring some of that pain of, you know, scaling to a 25,000 person organization. I mean, with $1 billion, that from like I don't know if you've ever like even looked at this, Mark, but this is like really sad note is like from like a per employee basis of revenue generated, you guys must have been, your ratios must have been like way outlier compared to the market.
Yeah, it was high. It was high, but you know, we were in a business that where you're able to do that, and not every business can do this, right? So it's sure. Like it's, you know, we're in the media business. There's an ability to, you know, if you bring in a customer can become very, very significant. So this is not really something that every style of business can actually do, but I would say like every category of business has the ability to think about it this way. And if you think about it this way, the key really is like, where are you versus the people in the companies in your industry, right? And so if you're in the right quartile or whatever, the top quartile of companies in your industry, then you're in the right place in terms of like, you know, people versus revenue. And if you're, you know, way down there, then you're most probably doing something wrong. You most probably need to figure out how to actually, you know, how to improve your tech stack and how to improve your product to actually generate that revenue per.
I think Mark just gave me a backhanded criticism of me, so I appreciate that.
I would never criticize this. I'm very I'm impressed with what you guys are doing, and obviously with our relationship. But tell me why you think so.
Yeah, I'm my own worst enemy here. Well, okay. There's two, I think, other areas that I want to get through, and then we probably should move on to the Q&A soon. Kara, I saw that you just came on. Were there some items of burning questions you're noticing that we should probably address too?
Well, I did want to just bring up one question that's gotten a number of upvotes here, since Mark just mentioned, you know, you kind of comparing your business to other businesses in your space and trying to identify an area, what you need to improve upon. And one of the questions that has been upvoted quite a bit is, you know, Mark, how do you recommend that a business try and figure out what exactly is the problem if they're unable to sell, right? Even if they have like decent assets, let's say, how can they determine whether the product just isn't useful for the customer? Maybe they're not reaching the right people, or if something else is wrong. How do you troubleshoot?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always goes back. So there are two things. One is it definitely speaking with your customers or your potential customers, and actually asking for value. So if somebody says, no, this is just not interesting, Very often, they won't give you a reason, or they'll give you a wrong reason, or they don't want to insult you or whatever it is. And sometimes just having that open conversation with a potential customer, say, understood, like I'm, not trying to sell you over here anymore. Understood that you don't want the product, but it would be really helpful for me and for my company just to know really where did we fail over here? Why don't you want to work together with us when we think it's actually something valuable for you? And they may very well give you honest feedback at that point. And that's really what you want. You want to try to get the open and honest feedback from people that you're talking with. So I'd say that would be one thing you can do, a helpful tactic. I think another helpful tactic, and this is counter to what I think, like, it takes some experience to be able to do this properly, but actually having relationships with other competitors in your industry. This is a really difficult thing to do if you're a first-time entrepreneur, or if you're right out of school and you're just kicking this off, or if you never went to school. And you're you're 18 and doing this, but if you're like, if you've had some experience doing this, it's typically very helpful to have relationships in the industry, talking with your competitors, and you both sort of get some give and take over there. If you do that well, you will learn a lot from that too, about where you need to be in terms of where the market is. The competition is.
Great answer. So I wanted to cover two things, and then let's go straight to the Q&A. Kara, is that all right? I see that we're getting a great queue here. Thanks for that. Sales funnel. So how do you design it? What tools are you recommending to people these days? What are, I would love to get your perspective on, what are the blocking and tackling pieces of like designing a great sales funnel here?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't have a great answer for you over here. We iterated on it so many times, and I've seen so many companies iterate this on this core problem so many times. I've had people who tell me they love Salesforce. I've had people who tell me they hate Salesforce. I've been in both of those places. What I think, I'll be much more theoretical over here than practical.
Sure.
What you need to know what you at least need to know is, like, when you're building a sales organization, you want to track every communication that you do have with a potential customer. You want to track every communication that your team has with a potential customer. And generally speaking, what you're going to see is that the people who have the highest velocity of actions you're going to be your best salespeople. And again, keeps on going back to the feedback loop. And highest velocity of actions literally could just mean updating your CRM. Like, hey, we spoke to this person today, or there's a new thing going on over here, or there's an email, or there was a text, or again, anything. Those are going to be your best salespeople. And so you literally can look at a chart and look at highest velocity, and you're almost always just going to match up to, velocity. That's it.
You Mike, I'm saying to myself right now, be still my heart, in everything that you're saying, because you're actually defining exactly the hustle fund's philosophy here, right? Which is just high velocity of action is really well correlated across many dimensions. I mean, even in engineering and products and sales, customer support, success, we've noticed the exact same thing too. Those who are just like really tenacious when it comes to the tools that they're using, the follow-ups and so forth, tend to be really great in our work as well. And this actually segues into the last question that I had before we open it up, which is around hiring. So, okay, we got some great customer development. We're on our way to product market fit, and we think we know what to sell, right? And, Mark, you've been doing a great job brute forcing it yourself, but it's now time to form a team. Like, what is the approach that you took to figuring out how to sell? Like, what kinds of characteristics and experiences did you want? Walk us through that experience.
Yeah, so we never really cared too much about experience. We cared a lot more about skills and about ability to communicate. So written skills was super important. So the ability to write like a clear and cohesive email is just such an important thing. So just writing skills, super important, and then communication skills, of course. But that was important. And I think the other thing that we did, and that I try to do when I can, is I don't know if this is the right expression, but try before you buy. This is not always something that you're able to do, but if you're able to hire somebody on a contractor basis versus an employee basis in the beginning, it's a great way to work together with that person first. And for both of you to see if there's a relationship over there that actually works, if the skill set works, and pay that person for their time. And then, move into a full-time role after that. And you could even define what that full-time role looks like if the person, if that relationship works over the course of like the first couple of months or something like that. And this is not always something that could be done, right? Like if you're hiring somebody that's coming from another job, but in today's market where there are a lot of people that are unemployed and looking for things to do, and with great sales skills out there, if you're looking to hire somebody, it's a great time to actually use this tactic. And it works for both parties, because frankly, if I'm going to join a company, I most probably want to spend a month or two with that company just to make sure that I actually want to work there. And so this works both ways. Maybe the culture sucks, maybe it's great. Yeah. I don't know, but like I'll know after working together for a month. So so I would suggest that as a way to actually test your hiring. And doing that also, you could actually, again, you can hire a few people in this way, and whoever maybe is the best, or 2 out of 3 or whatever it is, or even all of them, you bring them on. That's it. Yeah.
Great advice. I'm going to sneak in one last question. When do you hire for customer success? We have a sort of saying within our firm, which is like, sales is sexy, but what's even sexier is retention. Yeah. And generally that lies in good customer success managers who can drive a very easy retention conversation. When did that become relevant for you guys?
Yeah, I think you do that when your salespeople can't handle it anymore, right? So when you're expecting it, just when they come to you and they're like, we can't do this, right? When it's impacting the amount of business that they can bring in. So like it certainly doesn't impact it in the beginning. In the beginning, customer success, again, is very helpful for a salesperson to know what's going on over there, because it's just going to help them sell and bring in the next, it gives them the feedback. But at a certain point, once things do become more structured and your salespeople are like, well, this just doesn't, you can sense it when it's, when you just need to bring on more people. But again, I would say first figure out how can your customer success be, how can you handle it with the FAQ or something, right? Versus hiring for that FAQ. So, yeah.
Awesome. So for those of you who joined midway or didn't hear the introduction, we've been speaking with Mark Rosner, former head of revenue for AppLovin, grew his business from 0 to over $1 billion in annual revenue. We just went through our questions, but we want to talk through your questions too. And our amazing head of marketing at Hustle Fund, Kara DeMars, has just turned on her video. She has a big smile on her face. It sounds like she's seeing some really great stuff happening in the Q&A. Is that the case, Kara?
Yeah, we have so many great questions, and the list is getting longer by the minute. So I'm hoping we can get through as many of these as possible in the remaining, 17 minutes that we have with Mark.
Yeah, and a really quick plug here too. So Mark is active on Twitter as well under Mark_Rosner, ROSNER. So Mark, I'm actually volunteering you for this, which is like, if people tweet at you, I hope that you and me can try to field some stuff on Twitter as well if we don't get to the question.
Absolutely, I'd love to. Absolutely.
All right, okay, cool. Anyway, sorry, Kara, go ahead.
Thanks for that, Eric. That's really helpful. Okay, Mark, I'm just going to do some rapid fire questions here, and we just would love to hear your feedback.
Sure.
A number of people had some follow-up questions around your recommendation that you talk to your customers. So what specific questions would you ask to get actionable feedback? A lot of these startups are asking for feedback, but getting like a works great with very little actionable recommendations.
Yeah, so I think it's engaging with that customer. So is the question in relation to a customer that you already have or a customer that you can't get? What is that question?
Let's attack it from both angles.
Yeah.
How would you approach each one?
Yeah, I think so. So for customers that you don't have, definitely trickier to do that because they don't want to engage with you. They most probably don't want to talk with you. And I think I think what you can do over there is you could just make it so if you can make it sort of a pattern where if you're getting rejected and you're getting no's, in your reply you say, I understand, and you ask for that open feedback and you say, this would be really helpful for me, not, for this situation, really helpful for me in terms of like how I can improve the product and maybe come back to you in 6 months or a year or whatnot. And so I think if you can put that into your process, if you can put those questions into your actual process of, if I get rejected, how do I respond? That'll be helpful because even though you may not get a response from everybody, you will get a response over time. In terms of actual customers, I think it is super important to poll your existing customers. There are services to do this, and again, I don't know them off the top of my head, but there are companies out there that are startups that I've seen, and I don't remember them, but like remember the names. But there are startups that you can implement. They can plug into your CRM, and they can do, and they'll run questionnaires. They'll create meetings for you. A couple of meetings a week, just to actually engage with your existing customers. And that's super important, most probably for product managers, for salespeople as well, or for customer success people as well. And maybe for management, you're an early stage startup, you're a few people, you've got a lot of customers, plug one of these services in so that you're actively engaging with your customers, a couple of times a week, your existing customers, and making sure that it's an actual process to improve, to take customer feedback, versus you actually having to think about it and going out there and then suddenly remembering like, hey, it's been 2 months and I haven't spoken to a customer.
Got it.
Well, really quickly, I want to interject. There is a hustle fund company called Clockwork at clockworkhq.com. And
yes.
Mark, you might have looked at this deal too at one point.
Yes.
They do the auto scheduling for customer development.
Yeah, I thought what they're doing is great. I didn't end up investing into the company, but I thought the founding team was great, and I thought their product was great also.
Awesome. All right. Well, if you change your mind, we can have them. You can try to grovel your way back in, but we can talk.
Questions around getting leads, especially when the companies are first starting out. Do you recommend using LinkedIn? And if so, how do you leverage that as a tool?
Yeah, I do. 100%. I think LinkedIn is most probably your most effective tool out there to find the right leads. You can sign up for their Sales Navigator program. I think it is, depending, they have various different levels and different things that you can do over there. And you could definitely find a significant amount of leads over there. Yeah, I think LinkedIn is great, and it's the most obvious place to start. There's no reason not to start over there.
Great. Okay, a number of companies are working on just their MVP, right? So the minimum viable product of what they're building, and they're looking to get early sales, but many of the prospective customers aren't interested until it's built out a little bit more. Is there a good way to sort of pre-sell to some of these customers, or perhaps manage expectations if they have a really early version of the product, or should they just be focusing strictly on the product at this point?
No, I think you should be doing both. I think you should be talking to early potential customers as well. And then one of the things that you can do to keep them warm is have maybe like a bi-weekly newsletter about your update, where you are in the process of this product, and keeping these potential customers on this newsletter just to keep them warm for the time when you are able to actually follow up with them and say, hey, this thing is ready. It's definitely recommended to have that, to be building that pipeline, but also to keep them warm, to keep that pipeline warm in an efficient way. It's not efficient to do it one-to-one. It's much more efficient to do it via like a newsletter or something like that.
Okay, great. Pavan is asking if you can go into a little bit more detail around the structure of a sales team, especially in the early days. Who's the decision maker, and then what's sort of the hierarchy from there?
Depends on the product you're selling. But in the early days, I recommend a really, really flat organization, no hierarchy at all. And frankly, like as you get larger, I tend to recommend no hierarchy at all either.
As you get larger.
Yeah, I mean, even as you get larger, well, it depends. It depends on the scale, right? But generally speaking, you want to try to keep your organization. So we don't really speak about this, but you want to try to keep your organization as flat as possible, no matter where you are. And there are ways to do that, right? So with Slack, with other, maybe internal tools, but Slack is most probably the best way to do that. Is if you got a sales group, well, you've got a sales Slack channel, and everybody talks in that channel. That's a way to keep things pretty flat, because there's communication all across the board. I think I get nervous when there is a lot of hierarchy in a sales organization, because it's difficult for communication and feedback to bubble up from the ground level to whoever's over here if you got all these layers in between. And I would focus on, as you get larger, focus on how do you keep the organization flat? So how do you keep more people reporting to single people? And then what kinds of tools can you use to keep all that information sort of flowing amongst the entire group?
Okay. So not total anarchy. You're not recommending total anarchy, just a flatter.
All right, I'm trying to keep it as flat as possible.
Cool. Okay, I can see how that'd be helpful. Working from my experience in the past, I can also see that'd be helpful. Okay, switching gears a little bit. At AppLovin, you guys were selling to developers. You mentioned at the beginning of this event. What was the hardest thing about selling to developers, and then how did you overcome that obstacle?
Yeah, we had to get past their name. In the early days, it was an interesting name until people knew that we can actually perform. They were like, what's with this company? AppLovin?
Can we actually talk about this for a second? So like the rumor is that it was named after McLovin from Superbad. Is there any truth to that?
I think there's some truth to that. I don't know if there is full truth to that. I think it's like any founding story. I think it was just a cheap domain is what my CEO Adam used to say. It cost him $8, so that's but yeah, I think this was probably something to that also, but I wouldn't say it was the whole thing. But yeah, we had to get past the name. We had to show performance. So I think what you do is you always leverage what you've done before. So or you leverage what you have, right? So it's like when I started selling at AppLovin, well, what did I leverage? I leveraged the fact that I ran a very successful company beforehand, and hey, it was worthwhile talking to me. Not necessarily just because our product is going to be great for you, but it's probably worth the conversation because I've been successful in the past, and so like let's just have a good conversation. We'll both learn from each other. And I got a lot of conversations that way, had nothing to do with AppLovin. And so I think whoever's selling, you have to you're bringing something to the table that provides value. Maybe it's yourself, but if you're really junior or something, you're just down and you can't really sell yourself and your experiences. So you're selling your company, you're selling what they can do. And so like as we started bringing on customers and clients, then we started selling, well, hey, we're working with XYZ. This is why you should talk with us. And so your story is always evolving. It doesn't stay the same.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a couple that I really want to get to here. One is on sort of a bottoms-up strategy. There's certain SaaS companies like Zoom and Slack that will often come at, from a sales perspective, will come at sort of lower level employees versus higher level management. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you should do both. So I think you should do both. We used it. I definitely recommend doing it. And so you want the long tail strategy and you want the short tail strategy. Your salespeople go after the short tail. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but basically go after the really high value customers. and your marketing team and everybody else is building that brand and bringing in that long tail. And I think you do both. They both provide a lot of value. The long tail provides a lot of stability, and the short tail provides a lot of revenue. Would be the short way to say it.
Yeah, both important. All right. A couple of companies here are mentioning that their product could work for businesses in a number of different verticals. In that case, do you recommend that they try and become sort of an expert in one like niche, or try and go after companies across many different verticals simultaneously?
I recommend figuring out which vertical which vertical works the best for you, or rather where you work the best, and focusing on that vertical. I don't recommend really early selling against, what I recommend is selling against many verticals to learn what will work the best, and then to focus in on what actually is going to work the best for you. It's really distracting to build for different verticals. Very difficult to be a generalist in the early days. And you'll very quickly figure out what actually works the best, where your product works the best, and where you should be focusing your efforts on. If you can't do that, that's most probably a failing in your learning.
Okay. When thinking about your first 20 customers, do you recommend, let's assume for the sake of the conversation that most of those people are coming in through warm intros from your network. Do you recommend, is it valuable to maybe not charge those people and just use them for case studies and identifying product market fit right out the door?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think one of the traits that you find in successful entrepreneurs, successful startups, is that they're flexible, especially flexible in the early days, not so flexible once they figure out product market fit, basically. So once you figure out exactly how your product fits in, what the value is, what the pricing is, etc., I recommend being as inflexible as possible, and only working with the customers that you want to work with, because they fit inside your box, especially once you figure it out. But before you figure out what your box is, I recommend doing all sorts of things to figure it out. It takes some time to get there. You're never going to be quite there in your first product. If you're still on your first iteration, V1 of your product, then there's most probably a problem. Nobody sits on V1, right? It's like V20. So yeah.
Wonderful. a long ways to go for a number of these folks then. Okay. Now, in terms of following up with customers, when you were running your sales team, did you recommend that they follow up a certain number of times if there was a customer that they felt was a great fit, but just weren't responding?
Yeah, if you feel a customer's great, you got to figure out how to get through it, right? So that may be, hitting them every 7 days. That may be after the first or second time they don't get back to you, getting that warm introduction afterwards. That may be, maybe you don't have the right person in that organization and finding somebody else. There are so many different tactics you could use. I mean, there are times, where, you can say, I love this tactic, hey, I'm going to be in, let's say I'm in New York and, the company was in wherever, in Houston. Hey, I'm going to be in Houston next on Monday. Maybe I can stop by. And if they said yes, then I was in Houston. So I think there are a lot of different tactics you can use, and you should be. It's important to be aggressive, but it's important to be aggressive in a controlled, in a conservative way, I would say.
In that case with Houston, would you basically wait to buy your ticket until you got that yes?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't. Yeah, but I do it in a way where it was completely truthful, right? And then once I was in Houston, there was probably a couple other people that I could meet also.
I got business to do here, right?
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, that was the nice thing about our business, is that wherever we went in the world, there was somebody. So yeah, it was a great way to travel the world, I guess. Also,
you should have been I got business in Santorini, Greece. Next week.
I'm pretty sure we had some developers in Greece. I don't know about Santorini, but
Sure.
But I've never been. So. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, well, we're just about at time. I'd love to get into some more of these, but I just think we're probably not going to be able to squeeze in any more. But thank you, Mark, for answering all these questions. And for those of you who didn't get your questions answered, feel free to reach out on Twitter, and we'll try and get to as many as we can.
Yeah,
that's right. And what I'm going to do here is, again, first of all, thank Mark as well, personally, for coming on to answer our questions, answer your questions. We've been speaking with Mark Rosner, the former Chief Revenue Officer at AppLovin, serial entrepreneur, and now very active angel with his own firm, Applied Revenue. So here's his Twitter account. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see his face a little more closely here. And you can reach out to him at actually appliedrevenue.com, or he has this, this quick version here, Avenue.
Yeah.
Avenue.com.
But confusing. You got to work to actually get through.
It took me a little while myself, but there's many mechanisms to reach him. I would click on the follow button. By the way, I do follow you. I'm just not logged in right now. Mark_Rosner.com. I think that you're going to be having like 25,000 followers this time next year. You've been tweeting some really good stuff recently, so we can potentially continue the conversation here as well. And then just in closing too, we want to recognize as a Hustle Fund team how grateful we are for the support from Oracle NetSuite and putting together today's session. We are going to continue to work with them each month for the rest of this quarter on some feature sessions that are hopefully as good as this one. So thank you to all of our listeners today who are, I saw, logged in places like Singapore, definitely parts of the United States, and all around the world. Very much appreciate these questions. And again, final thank you. Mark, thank you so much, man, for coming on to doing this with us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This was great.
All right, check them out, appliedrevenue.com. All right, thanks all. Peace.
Thank you.